Have you ever noticed how some moments in your life don't feel random at all, even though you were taught they should be? A near accident that somehow misses you by inches. A meeting that happens only because you were late by 30 seconds. A failure that quietly reroutes you towards something you could never have planned. And later, when you look back, the shape of it feels deliberate, almost intimate, as if the universe leaned in and whispered, "Not yet," or "now." We are told these are coincidences. We are told to call it luck. But what if that word is just a placeholder for something far more unsettling? What if luck isn't chance at all, but timing? And what if timing isn't random, but responsive? Most of us grow up believing the world is a spinning wheel of probabilities, blind and indifferent, scattering outcomes without preference. You work hard, you fail or succeed. You try again, you get lucky, or you don't. And yet, deep down, many of us carry a quiet discomfort with that explanation. Because our lives don't feel like dice rolls. They feel like stories. They feel edited. Some chapters drag, some are skipped, some repeat themselves until we finally understand what they were asking of us. If randomness truly ruled everything, why does meaning keep leaking through the cracks? Think of the moments people describe as being saved by luck, the missed flight that crashes, the relationship that ends just before it would have destroyed you, the job rejection that forces you into a path you never would have chosen, but can no longer imagine living without. From the outside, these look like statistical noise. From the inside, they feel like intervention. Not dramatic, not supernatural, but precise, quiet, surgical, as if something is constantly adjusting your trajectory by millimeters, not miles, because millimeters are enough to change everything. Physics tells us that the universe is not the solid, clockwork machine we once imagined. At its deepest level, reality behaves less like a machine and more like a field of probabilities, waves of potential that only become fixed when observed, interacted with, chosen. Timing matters, phase matters, alignment matters. In nature, systems that share a rhythm tend to synchronize. Fireflies blink together, pendulum clocks on the same wall fall into the same swing. Hearts, breathing patterns, even brain waves can fall into coherence when bodies are close enough. Synchronization is not an anomaly. It is a fundamental behavior of reality. So, what happens when a human life becomes part of that equation? What if some people are not lucky in the way we imagine, but resonant? What if their actions, attention, and internal state place them in phase with unfolding events, while others remain slightly out of sync, always arriving too early or too late? Always pushing when the current is pulling elsewhere. We admire the outcomes without seeing the rhythm underneath. We praise the wins and ignore the timing that made those wins possible. You may have noticed this in your own life. Times when effort felt heavy, like swimming against invisible resistance, no matter how disciplined or talented you were. And other times when the smallest step created disproportionate movement, when doors opened before you even knocked, when people appeared exactly when you needed them, saying the precise sentence that unlocked something inside you. The same world, the same you, different phase. This is where the idea becomes uncomfortable. Because if luck is alignment, then misfortune might not be failure. It might be feedback. Not punishment, not reward, correction. A system gently or sometimes violently nudging you away from trajectories that no longer fit who you are becoming. In that frame, the universe is not hostile, but it is not sentimental either. It does not care about your plans. It responds to your coherence. We are taught to chase outcomes, to force results through sheer will. But alignment does not respond to force. It responds to fit. In physics, resonance occurs not when energy is maximized, but when frequency matches. Push at the wrong rhythm and nothing happens. Push at the right one and the system amplifies you. This is why some people seem to move through chaos untouched, while others are broken by much smaller disruptions. It is not strength, it is tuning. And tuning is not comfortable, because to align, something in you must stop resisting what is already true. You must let go of identities that no longer resonate. You must release futures you are emotionally attached to, even when they look impressive on paper. Alignment often begins as loss, as confusion, as the feeling that the world has stopped responding to the version of you that used to work. People call this bad luck. But what if it's simply desynchronization? A sign that the rhythm you are moving to no longer matches the rhythm of where you are meant to go. This is why the early stages of alignment often feel like isolation. Friends drift. Opportunities dry up. Familiar patterns collapse. The noise fades. And in that silence, something else becomes audible. A quieter signal. Intuition sharpens. Small coincidences begin to cluster. Not dramatic miracles, but just subtle confirmations. You think of someone and they call. You read a line that answers a question you didn't know how to ask. You arrive somewhere with no plan and leave with exactly what you needed. These moments don't shout, they hum. Skeptics will say this is pattern seeking. A brain evolved to find meaning where none exists. And they are not entirely wrong. The human mind is a prediction engine. It connects dots. It fills gaps. But here is the deeper question. Why does the universe reward that behavior with coherence? Why does attention itself seem to shape probability? In quantum experiments, observation changes outcomes. In psychology, expectation alters performance. In social systems, belief shifts behavior. At every scale, participation matters. So, where does coincidence end and communication begin? Consider the people who seem to live inside a current. Not flawless, not immune to pain, but strangely protected. Accidents miss them. Opportunities reappear in different forms when one path closes. Even their failures redirect them towards something oddly fitting. These individuals often don't feel lucky. They feel guided, sometimes exhausted by it, because alignment is not indulgent. It demands honesty. It strips away illusions quickly. It accelerates consequences. When you are in sync, feedback is immediate. There is no room to hide from yourself. This is the darker side of the idea. If luck is alignment, then it is not something you win. It is something you submit to. You cannot fake resonance. You cannot trick timing. The universe does not respond to desire alone. It responds to congruence. Who you are, what you pay attention to, what you are willing to release. These shape the field around you more than effort ever could. And this is why some people appear unlucky no matter how hard they try. Not because they are cursed, but because they are clinging to versions of themselves that no longer match the trajectory they are on. The system keeps sending resistance, not out of cruelty, but clarity. Like a GPS recalculating when you refuse to turn. The recalculations feel like delays, like punishment, but they are simply the cost of refusing alignment. In this light, luck stops being a mystery and becomes a relationship, a dynamic exchange between your internal state and the timing of the world. When you fight it, life feels heavy and hostile. When you move with it, things unfold with an eerie smoothness that feels almost unreal. Not perfect, not painless, but coherent. And coherence is seductive, because once you notice it, you can't unsee it. You begin to question every so-called accident, every missed connection, every sudden opening. You wonder whether your life has always been responding to you, quietly, patiently, waiting for you to listen, waiting for you to stop forcing outcomes and start noticing timing, waiting for you to realize that luck might not be something that happens to you, but something that happens through you. This is not a comforting thought. It removes excuses. It removes the fantasy of randomness as protection. Because if alignment is real, then your attention matters more than you were taught. Your inner coherence shapes outer probability more than you were told. And the universe is not ignoring you. It is responding, constantly. The question is not whether you are lucky. The question is whether you are in sync. Have you ever felt like time itself behaves differently around you, stretching in some moments and collapsing in others, as if reality is quietly deciding when things are allowed to happen? Not metaphorically, literally. Days where nothing moves no matter how hard you push. And other days where a single decision cascades into a chain of events so precise it feels rehearsed. This is where alignment stops being an abstract idea and starts to feel mechanical, like there is a hidden clock beneath your life, ticking at a pace you don't consciously control. We like to imagine time as neutral, a straight river flowing past us at a constant speed. But physics doesn't agree with that story. Time bends under gravity. It slows near massive objects. It dilates with velocity. Two clocks placed in different conditions will disagree about how much time has passed. This isn't philosophy. It's measurement, which means the idea of a single universal tempo was always an illusion. Even the universe cannot keep perfect time with itself. So why would a human life? Think about how often success or failure comes down not to what you did, but when you did it. The same idea spoken a year earlier is ignored and praised as genius a year later. The same risk taken at one moment destroys you and taken later defines you. We tell ourselves stories about preparation, strategy, intelligence. But underneath all of that, timing decides whether effort compounds or evaporates. We rarely fail because we are wrong. We fail because we are early or late. This is what alignment really whispers. You are not late in life. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are out of phase. In nature, when two systems operate at slightly different frequencies, they interfere with each other. Peaks cancel peaks. Progress feels jerky, unstable, exhausting. But when frequencies match, something strange happens. Energy transfers effortlessly. Small inputs produce large effects. This is resonance. And resonance is not created by force. It is created by matching. Your life, whether you realize it or not, has a frequency. It is shaped by your beliefs, your fears, your attention, your unspoken expectations. And the world responds to that frequency, not your intentions. This is why two people can walk into the same opportunity and experience entirely different outcomes. One feels invisible friction. The other feels carried. The environment hasn't changed. The alignment has. This is deeply unsettling because it means discipline alone is not enough. Hard work alone is not enough. You can push endlessly in the wrong rhythm and exhaust yourself without moving an inch. And you can make a single, quiet shift in the right moment and change the trajectory of your entire life. From the outside, it looks unfair. From the inside, it feels inevitable. Most people sense this intuitively. That's why phrases like, "the timing just wasn't right," carry so much emotional weight. We say them after breakups, after missed chances, after failures that don't make sense on paper. They are admissions that logic failed us, but experience didn't. Something invisible vetoed the outcome. What we rarely ask is why. If timing matters this much, what sets it? Is it external, like tides we can't control, or internal, like a rhythm we generate and broadcast without realizing it? The answer appears to be both. Systems synchronize not because one dominates the other, but because interaction creates coherence. Your internal state influences how you interact with the world, and the world feeds that interaction back to you, reinforcing or resisting it. This feedback loop is why periods of your life feel cursed or blessed in clusters. Bad luck doesn't arrive once. It piles up. Missed buses, arguments, mistakes, delays, all stacking in a way that feels personal. And good luck behaves the same way. Opportunities stack, encounters stack, momentum builds. This clustering is not random noise, it is phase locking. Once a system falls into a rhythm, it tends to stay there until something disrupts it. This is where awareness becomes dangerous, because once you notice the rhythm, you also notice how easily it can be lost. Anxiety disrupts it, desperation disrupts it, obsession disrupts it. The more you try to force alignment, the further out of sync you become. This is the paradox at the heart of timing. Wanting the outcome too badly shifts your frequency away from the conditions that allow it. You felt this. Waiting for a message, waiting for news, waiting for approval. The minutes stretch, your thoughts spiral. And when the thing finally arrives, it feels anticlimactic, smaller than you imagined. Not because it lacked value, but because your internal state was misaligned with its arrival. You were leaning into the future instead of standing in the present. Alignment pulls you back. It insists on presence, on coherence between thought, emotion, and action. When these are fragmented, timing fragments too. You rush when you should pause, you hesitate when you should move, and every misstep reinforces the feeling that life is against you, when in reality, you are simply arguing with the clock. This is why so many breakthroughs happen after surrender, after someone stops trying, after they release the outcome and focus on the process. It sounds like spiritual cliché, but it has a mechanical explanation. Letting go reduces internal noise. Reduced noise allows clearer interaction with the environment. Clearer interaction produces better timing. Better timing looks like luck. The universe doesn't reward resignation. It rewards coherence. This is also why alignment can feel cruel before it feels kind. When your internal rhythm changes, the external world doesn't instantly match it. There is lag. Old patterns resist dissolution. Relationships strain. Habits collapse. You feel temporarily worse, not better. This is not regression. It is desynchronization before resynchronization. Like tuning an instrument, tension increases before harmony emerges. During these periods, many people retreat. They assume something is wrong with them. They try to revert to who they were. But alignment doesn't move backward, it recalibrates forward. And forward often feels like loss before it feels like clarity. There is another unsettling implication here. If timing responds to internal coherence, then attention itself becomes a form of action. What you dwell on, what you rehearse emotionally, what you expect without saying out loud, these all contribute to your rhythm. You are constantly broadcasting a signal, and the world is constantly responding, not with judgment, but with feedback. This is why some people feel like life is always just about to happen for them, but never quite does. They live in anticipation, not participation, always preparing, never arriving. Their frequency is tuned to waiting, so the world gives them more to wait for. And this is why others seem to stumble into exactly what they need without trying. Not because they don't care, but because they are fully engaged with where they are. Their frequency is grounded, responsive, alive, and the world meets them there. Alignment is not mystical destiny. It is not a promise of comfort. It is a dynamic conversation between you and reality, conducted in the language of timing. When you speak clearly, the response is clear. When you speak in noise, the response is noise. This raises a quiet, unsettling question. If your life feels stalled, chaotic, or hostile, what rhythm are you currently in? Not what do you want, but what are you actually reinforcing through thought, emotion, and behavior? Because the clock beneath your life doesn't care about your intentions. It keeps time with your coherence. And the moment you begin to sense that, the idea of luck starts to dissolve. In its place emerges something more demanding, but also more honest. Responsibility not for outcomes, but for alignment. Not for control, but for tuning. The unsettling truth is this: you cannot choose when things happen, but you can influence whether you are ready when they do. And readiness, as we will see, is far more powerful than effort. Have you ever noticed how coincidences rarely arrive alone? One strange overlap is easy to dismiss. 2 raise an eyebrow. But 3, 4, 5, stacked so tightly they blur into each other, begin to feel intrusive, as if reality itself is leaning too close. A name repeats across different mouths in a single day. A number follows you from clocks to receipts to license plates. A thought you never spoke is answered by a sentence you overhear from a stranger. At first, it feels amusing, then it feels personal, and eventually, it feels impossible to ignore. We call these moments coincidences because the alternative is unsettling. Coincidence suggests randomness, and randomness protects us from implication. If events are random, they are not about us. They do not point. They do not expect a response. But clustered coincidence breaks that comfort. It feels less like noise and more like pattern, less like chance and more like timing with intent. This is where alignment reveals a darker texture. In complex systems, randomness rarely looks random from the inside. Patterns emerge naturally when many variables interact. Weather systems form spirals, markets move in waves, human behavior clusters in trends, and beneath all of it, feedback loops amplify what already exists. A small signal repeated becomes a dominant force. A slight preference reinforced becomes destiny. This is not mysticism. This is how systems behave when they are sensitive to initial conditions. Your life is such a system. When you pay attention to something, you increase its weight in your internal model of reality. Your perception sharpens around it. Your behavior subtly adjusts. You notice related details you would have ignored before. And because you act differently, the world responds differently. The loop tightens. From the outside, it looks like coincidence. From the inside, it feels like convergence. This is the coincidence engine at work. But here is the unsettling part. The engine does not distinguish between conscious intention and unconscious fixation. It amplifies whatever you feed it. Fear, curiosity, longing, avoidance, they all broadcast frequency, and the system answers with matching data. This is why people stuck in anxiety experience constant bad luck. Not because they deserve it, but because vigilance tunes perception toward threat and behavior toward defense, creating feedback that reinforces the very state they are trying to escape. Likewise, curiosity tunes perception toward possibility, engagement tunes behavior toward responsiveness, and responsiveness invites timing. The engine is neutral. It does not judge the quality of the signal, it only reflects it. This reframes coincidence from a gift into a mirror. Think about the moments in your life when coincidences escalated, not just once, but repeatedly, until they forced a decision. A relationship that kept reappearing in different forms. A theme that resurfaced across jobs, cities, conversations. A question that refused to stay buried, following you through different phases of your life. These are not interruptions. They are unresolved loops. Systems hate unresolved loops. In computing, a loop that never resolves consumes resources until something breaks. In psychology, unresolved conflicts surface as recurring patterns. In narratives, unfinished arcs demand continuation. Your life operates under the same pressure. What you avoid does not disappear. It returns, often louder, often stranger, until engagement occurs. Coincidences are one of the ways engagement is requested. This is why they often arrive at thresholds, before major decisions, during identity shifts, after loss, during moments of internal instability. When your internal model of who you are begins to change, the external world responds with signals that test coherence. Are you paying attention? Are you willing to respond differently this time? Or will you repeat the same pattern and confirm the same outcome? This is where coincidence becomes dangerous, not because it predicts fate, but because it tempts interpretation. Humans crave meaning. We want signs to tell us what to do, and when coincidences cluster, the temptation to surrender agency to them becomes strong, to treat them as instructions rather than invitations. But alignment does not remove choice, it sharpens it. Coincidences do not tell you what will happen. They highlight where attention is needed. They draw a circle around a question and say, look here. What you do with that attention determines whether the loop resolves or tightens further. This is why ignoring coincidences often makes them escalate. The system increases signal strength when response is absent. Louder overlaps, more obvious timing, more emotional charge, not to punish, but to be noticed. Like tapping a microphone to check if it's live. And this is also why obsession with coincidences derails alignment. When you begin hunting for signs, you flood the system with noise. Every overlap becomes suspicious. Every random detail feels loaded. The signal-to-noise ratio collapses. Meaning dissolves into paranoia. The engine keeps responding, but now it is responding to confusion. This is the observer's trap forming. Attention shapes probability, but obsession distorts attention. Alignment requires clarity, not fixation. Presence, not surveillance. When you are aligned, coincidences feel light, even when they are intense. They inform without demanding. When you are misaligned, coincidences feel heavy, urgent, almost threatening. They push instead of guide. Your emotional response is the key diagnostic. True alignment does not create anxiety. It creates recognition. A quiet sense of yes, even when the implication is uncomfortable. False alignment creates urgency, fear, and compulsion. It demands immediate interpretation. It pressures you to act without reflection. One expands awareness. The other collapses it. This distinction matters because coincidence is not rare. What is rare is coherent response. Most people experience clusters of coincidence and either dismiss them entirely or surrender to them completely. Both reactions miss the point. Dismissal blocks feedback. Surrender abdicates agency. Alignment lives in the tension between curiosity and restraint. And here the question deepens. If coincidences are feedback loops, then what is the system they belong to? Is it purely psychological, a byproduct of perception and behavior? Or is there something more distributed at work? A collective field shaped by billions of interacting minds, histories, and probabilities. Physics offers a clue. At the quantum level, particles that interact remain correlated even when separated by vast distances. Change one, and the other responds. Not because information travels between them, but because they are part of the same system. Correlation without communication. Connection without signal. Human lives may operate similarly. Not at the level of particles, but at the level of patterns. Shared symbols, shared fears, shared narratives. When you shift internally, you interact differently with these shared structures. And because they are shared, the effects appear external, coincidental, even fated. But nothing supernatural is required for this to feel uncanny. Only sensitivity. Alignment increases sensitivity. When you are coherent, small signals stand out. Timing feels sharper. Choices feel weighted. Life begins to feel less like a blur and more like a sequence of meaningful frames. This can feel empowering, but it can also feel overwhelming. Because once you see the feedback, you can't unsee it. Every choice feels consequential. Every avoidance feels amplified. This is why many people unconsciously resist alignment. Not because they don't want meaning, but because meaning carries responsibility. If coincidences are messages, even neutral ones, then ignoring them becomes a choice. And choice implies ownership. Randomness absolves us. Alignment implicates us. So we oscillate. We notice patterns, then dismiss them. We feel guided, then retreat into skepticism. This oscillation keeps us comfortable, but it keeps us out of sync. True alignment requires a steadier stance, one that allows for mystery without surrendering discernment, one that listens without obeying blindly. As this awareness grows, coincidences begin to change character. They become less dramatic, less frequent, but more precise. Not fireworks, but compass points. Not overwhelming, but clarifying. This is the sign that the loop is resolving, that the system no longer needs to shout. And that brings us to an uncomfortable realization. If coincidence fades with alignment, then the absence of signs is not abandonment. It is confirmation. The system stops correcting when coherence is achieved. Silence, in this context, is not emptiness. It is stability. Which means the moments when coincidences are loudest are not blessings. They are crossroads. The engine is not trying to impress you. It is trying to synchronize you. And the deeper question, the one we will have to face next, is this. If alignment changes how probability behaves around you, does it also change how other people experience you? Do some individuals carry coherence so strong that it bends outcomes not just for themselves, but for everyone nearby? Because if that is true, then luck is no longer individual, it is contagious. Have you ever noticed how probability seems to develop a personality when you get close to it? On paper, chance is sterile. Numbers, distributions, cold likelihoods. But inside a life, probability feels moody, selective, almost relational. It favors some paths and resists others. It opens effortlessly for one person while quietly shutting itself around someone else, even when their effort looks identical. From the outside, this feels unfair. From the inside, it feels intimate, like the world is responding to something it recognizes. This is where alignment stops being subtle and starts becoming unsettling. If probability were truly blind, outcomes would distribute evenly over time, but lived experience contradicts this. Some people move through risk repeatedly without consequence. Others face disproportionate fallout from minor mistakes. This isn't because the universe loves or hates anyone, it's because probability in practice is not a static rulebook. It is an active field shaped by conditions, and conditions are never neutral. In physics, probability is not an object, it is a measure of potential, a description of what could happen given a specific state. Change the state, and probability reshapes instantly. Increase energy, change environment, alter constraints, and outcomes that were once unlikely become inevitable. The math doesn't care. It simply responds. A human life is also a state. Your emotional baseline, your expectations, your sense of identity, the stories you tell yourself about what kind of person you are and what kind of world you live in. These are not abstract. They influence how you move, how you hesitate, how you interpret signals, how others respond to you. They change the conditions, and when conditions change, probability follows. This is why alignment can feel like protection. Not mystical protection, but statistical insulation. You still encounter danger, loss, and uncertainty, but they don't penetrate in the same way. Near misses cluster, disasters divert. Solutions appear just before collapse. From the outside, this looks like luck. From the inside, it feels like being carried by something you can't quite see. But here's the shadow most people don't want to face. If probability can soften around coherence, it can also harden around resistance. When someone is deeply misaligned, when their actions, beliefs, and internal state are pulling in different directions, the world seems to push back. Plans unravel. Timing fails. The smallest disruptions cascade into chaos. This isn't because the universe is punishing them. It's because incoherence creates friction. Energy leaks. Attention fragments. Choices become reactive instead of responsive, and probability amplifies instability just as efficiently as it amplifies flow. This is why misfortune often arrives in waves, not because of fate, but because once instability enters a system, it feeds on itself. Stress leads to distraction. Distraction leads to mistakes. Mistakes lead to consequences. Consequences reinforce the belief that things always go wrong, and that belief shapes the next interaction. The field tightens. In this way, probability doesn't judge, it mirrors. This realization can be terrifying, because it suggests that luck is not something you stumble into, but something you cultivate, often unconsciously. It suggests that the world is not indifferent, but responsive, and responsiveness means responsibility. Not blame, responsibility. For coherence. Alignment is not moral. It doesn't care if you are good or bad. It cares if you are congruent. A dishonest person can be aligned. A kind person can be misaligned. Alignment is about internal consistency, not virtue. This is why charismatic manipulators sometimes seem untouchable, while sincere people struggle endlessly. The universe responds to clarity, not ethics. This is difficult to accept because we want fairness to be moral. We want effort and goodness to guarantee outcomes. But reality does not operate on deserving. It operates on resonance, and resonance is ruthless in its neutrality. Yet, there is a deeper layer. Alignment does not guarantee comfort. It guarantees momentum. When probability softens around you, it doesn't necessarily lead you toward what you want. It leads you toward what fits. And fit can dismantle identities you worked hard to build. It can end relationships that look stable. It can redirect careers that define you. This is why alignment often feels like loss before it feels like arrival. The field clears what no longer resonates to make space for what does. People who live in alignment often describe a strange exhaustion, not from effort, but from acceleration. When things move quickly, there is no time to cling. You are asked to respond, not plan, to adapt, not control. And while this feels liberating in hindsight, it can feel destabilizing in the moment. You win things you didn't chase and lose things you tried desperately to hold. From the outside, it looks like luck. From the inside, it feels like surrender under pressure. This reframes success itself. Success stops being accumulation and starts being flow. You don't stack achievements, you move through phases. Each phase has its own probabilities, its own openings, its own endings. Trying to extend a phase past its coherence invites resistance. Letting it end invites movement. This is why people sometimes experience their greatest breakthroughs immediately after their greatest failures. The failure collapses a misaligned structure. The probability field reconfigures. New paths that were previously inaccessible suddenly appear obvious. We call this resilience. But it's not strength that creates the opening, it's release. Alignment rewards release faster than effort. This is deeply counterintuitive in cultures built on control. We are taught to double down, to push harder, to force outcomes through persistence. And sometimes, this works. But when it doesn't, persistence turns into self-sabotage. You keep applying pressure to a system that needs reconfiguration, not reinforcement. Probability doesn't bend. It resists. The people who seem lucky often know when to stop pushing. They sense when resistance is not a challenge to overcome, but a signal to change frequency. They withdraw at the right moment. They pivot without drama. They let go before desperation sets in. This is not weakness, it is sensitivity. Sensitivity is not fragility, it is resolution. High-resolution systems detect small changes early. They adjust before collapse. Low-resolution systems miss subtle signals and only respond when consequences are severe. Alignment increases resolution. You feel misfit earlier. You sense timing shifts sooner. This can feel like anxiety if misunderstood, or intuition if trusted. And this is where probability truly begins to feel alive. Not conscious, not intentional, but responsive in the way ecosystems are responsive. A forest doesn't care about a single tree, but it responds instantly to imbalance. Remove too much, and collapse follows. Allow regeneration, and abundance returns. Your life operates inside a similar ecology. When you are aligned, you take only what fits. You contribute without depletion. You move when movement is supported. Probability cooperates. When you are misaligned, you extract, resist, cling. The system tightens. Probability becomes sharp. This doesn't mean you can think your way into luck. It means you can live your way into coherence, and coherence is felt before it is seen, as calm in decision-making, as reduced urgency, as clarity about what is no longer yours to carry. Which leads us to a question that quietly unsettles everything. If probability responds to coherence, then what happens when coherence exists not just within an individual, but between individuals? What happens when two people, or a group, fall into sync? Does probability amplify further? Does timing accelerate? Does reality bend more noticeably? Because if that is true, then some people don't just experience alignment, they transmit it. And that is where the story becomes even more disturbing. Some people enter your life and the room feels different before they say a word. Conversations accelerate, decisions clarify. Coincidences multiply in their presence, not dramatically, but consistently, like gravity quietly rearranging furniture. You may not trust them. You may not even like them. But things move when they arrive. Outcomes bend. Timing sharpens. And later, when you try to explain what changed, you can't point to anything specific. Only that after them, life was no longer the same. This is where alignment stops being personal and becomes relational. If coherence shapes probability, then coherence shared between people should amplify it. Systems don't just synchronize internally, they synchronize with each other. This is why metronomes placed on the same surface eventually tick together, why crowds fall into rhythm, why emotions spread faster than logic. Humans are not isolated processors. We are oscillators, constantly adjusting to the frequencies around us. Some people carry a stable signal. They are internally consistent. Their thoughts, emotions, and actions point in the same direction. Not because they are enlightened or perfect, but because they are clear. They know what they are and what they are not. This clarity reduces noise, and reduced noise creates a strong signal. When you interact with such a person, your own internal systems adjust, sometimes subtly, sometimes violently. This is why certain relationships feel catalytic. They don't just add something to your life. They reorganize it. You change jobs, you move cities, you abandon beliefs you didn't realize were provisional. You feel accelerated, unsettled, awake. And when the relationship ends, as many of these do, the absence feels disorienting, like gravity suddenly switching off. People often romanticize this as fate or chemistry, but chemistry is not mysterious. It is alignment between structures. When two systems resonate, energy transfer increases, change happens faster, feedback loops tighten, growth accelerates. This is also why such relationships are rarely comfortable. Alignment between people exposes incoherence quickly. You can hide from yourself alone. You cannot hide in resonance. Misalignment surface as conflict, discomfort, attraction, or aversion. You feel seen in ways you didn't consent to, and the system demands resolution. Either you adapt or you break away. This is the alignment tax. Being near coherence costs you incoherence. Old identities cannot survive sustained resonance. Pretenses dissolve. Excuses lose power. This is why many people sabotage their most aligned relationships. Not because they don't want connection, but because connection reveals too much. Alignment removes the buffer of randomness. You can no longer blame timing or circumstance. You are forced to confront choice. This applies beyond romance. Mentors, rivals, collaborators, even brief encounters can act as alignment events. Someone says a sentence that rearranges your priorities. Someone challenges you in a way that exposes a false self. Someone believes in a version of you that you haven't earned yet. And suddenly the pressure to become coherent with that belief becomes unbearable. These people often leave quickly. They are not meant to stay. They are meant to tune you. This reframes loss in a way that is both painful and clarifying. Some connections are not meant to be permanent because their function is not companionship, it is calibration. Once the frequency shift occurs, the system no longer needs the same input. The relationship dissolves, often abruptly, often painfully, leaving behind momentum you didn't ask for, but can't return. From the outside, this looks like chaos. From the inside, it feels like being pushed off a ledge you didn't know was there, only to realize mid-fall that the ground has already moved. This is why alignment often comes with grief. You mourn versions of yourself that can no longer exist. You mourn futures that are now impossible. You mourn the illusion of stability. But grief is not a sign of error. It is a sign of transition. The system is shedding mass to move faster. People who transmit alignment are not always kind. Some are harsh. Some are distant. Some are deeply flawed. But their coherence makes them unavoidable. You cannot ignore the effect they have on your trajectory. They force you into motion simply by being who they are. And this creates an uncomfortable moral ambiguity. If alignment amplifies outcomes, then aligned people can cause harm as efficiently as they cause growth. A coherent manipulator can devastate systems. A coherent narcissist can bend rooms to their will. This is why charisma is dangerous. Not because it deceives, but because it synchronizes. People entrain to the strongest signal in the room, not the most ethical one. Alignment does not guarantee goodness. This is why responsibility increases with coherence. The more aligned you are, the more influence you carry, whether you intend to or not. Your presence shapes probabilities around you. Your reactions ripple. Your timing affects others' timing. You become part of the field they are navigating. Most people sense this intuitively. That's why certain individuals are described as bad luck or good luck to be around. Not because they cause events directly, but because their internal state shifts the collective rhythm. Anxiety spreads, calm spreads, focus spreads, chaos spreads, and probability follows. This raises a disturbing possibility. If alignment is transmissible, then misalignment is too. You can inherit rhythms that aren't yours, family patterns, cultural expectations, relationship dynamics. You can live inside someone else's frequency for years, mistaking it for your own, wondering why nothing fits. When you finally step out, the withdrawal feels like emptiness, but emptiness is just silence before your own signal emerges. Alignment requires solitude at some point, a decoupling, a period where your internal rhythm stabilizes without interference. This is why periods of isolation often precede major life shifts. The system needs to reset, to find its baseline, to stop compensating for external noise. Only then can shared alignment be healthy. Only then can relationships amplify without consuming. This is why some people seem to become more lucky after leaving certain environments, jobs, or relationships. Not because they escaped something evil, but because they escaped interference. Their frequency stabilized. Timing returned. Opportunities reappeared. Luck returned. But now it looks different. Quieter. Less dramatic. More reliable. This leads us to a sobering truth. Alignment is not about attracting things. It is about removing interference, about simplifying your signal until the world can respond clearly. The more complex your internal contradictions, the noisier the response. The simpler your coherence, the sharper the timing. And this is where the real danger begins. Because once you realize that your state affects others, you can no longer pretend your choices are isolated. Your alignment or misalignment ripples outward. You contribute to fields you don't see. You tune rooms without speaking. You shape probabilities without intending to. Which means the question is no longer just whether you are aligned. The question becomes whether you are aligned responsibly. And that brings us to the next uncomfortable layer. What happens when you become aware of alignment? When you start watching timing too closely? When you begin to measure yourself against the signal you think you're sending? Because awareness itself changes the system, and not always for the better. The moment you become aware of alignment, something subtle shifts. What once flowed quietly now feels observed. Timing that used to arrive naturally begins to hesitate. Coincidences that felt gentle start to feel charged. You begin to wonder whether you are still moving with the current or merely watching yourself try. This is the paradox at the center of awareness. The act of noticing changes the thing being noticed. You have felt this before, even if you never named it. The instant you become conscious of your breathing, it no longer feels automatic. The moment you think about how to walk, your steps feel awkward. Awareness introduces friction, and when alignment is delicate, friction matters. In physics, observation is not passive. Measuring a system requires interaction, and interaction alters outcomes. At the smallest scales, particles behave differently when observed, not because of mystery, but because observation itself is a form of participation. There is no clean separation between watcher and process. The same may be true for a human life. When you start tracking luck, you change your relationship to it. At first, awareness feels empowering. You begin to notice patterns earlier. You catch timing shifts before they derail you. You feel more intentional, more awake. But slowly something else creeps in. Self-monitoring, doubt, performance. You start asking, am I aligned right now? Did I just break it? Should I have waited longer? Should I move faster? The quiet hum of coherence becomes crowded with questions. This is the observer's trap. Alignment requires presence. The observer's trap replaces presence with evaluation. You stop inhabiting the moment and start standing outside it, measuring your own state. This creates a split, and split systems lose coherence. Timing slips, decisions feel heavier, outcomes feel less fluid, and the irony is painful. The more you try to stay aligned, the further out of sync you feel. Many people abandon the idea here. They decide it was all imagination, all pattern seeking, all coincidence. They retreat into cynicism because cynicism is quiet. It doesn't ask anything of you. It restores the illusion of randomness, which feels like relief after the pressure of meaning. Others go the opposite direction. They fall into hypervigilance. Every event becomes a sign. Every delay becomes loaded. Every choice feels existential. They search for alignment the way gamblers search for hot streaks, convinced that if they can just read the pattern correctly, they can control the outcome. This is not alignment. This is anxiety disguised as insight. True alignment sits between these extremes. It does not require constant checking. It does not demand interpretation. It is felt, not tracked. And the moment you feel compelled to prove it to yourself, it begins to dissolve. This is why many aligned phases end abruptly. Not because the rhythm disappears, but because self-consciousness interrupts it. You begin to identify with the state. You want to keep it. And wanting to keep it introduces fear of losing it. Fear tightens the system. Tight systems lose flexibility. Probability stiffens. The universe doesn't withdraw alignment as punishment. It simply responds to the new conditions. This creates a cruel lesson. Alignment cannot be possessed. It can only be participated in. The moment you try to own it, to secure it, to lock it down, you step out of rhythm, like trying to grab water with a clenched fist. The tighter you squeeze, the less you hold. There is another layer to this trap, quieter and more dangerous. When you become aware of alignment, you may begin to see yourself as special. Not overtly, not arrogantly, but subtly. You think, maybe I'm one of the ones who sees, one of the ones who are tuned in. This identity, even if never spoken, creates separation. And separation breeds distortion. You start interpreting neutral events as confirmation. You dismiss feedback that contradicts your self-image. You protect the narrative of alignment rather than the reality of coherence. This is how insight turns into delusion. Alignment does not make you chosen, it makes you responsive. The moment you confuse responsiveness with importance, the system corrects harshly. Timing collapses. Momentum stalls, not to humble you, but to restore balance. The field does not support narratives that place you above it. It supports participation within it. This is why genuinely aligned people often seem unimpressed by their own experiences. They don't dramatize coincidences. They don't talk about being lucky. They don't explain their timing. They move, adjust, respond. Alignment for them is not an identity. It is a condition, like weather. Sometimes favorable, sometimes not. Always changing. And this brings us to a critical distinction. Alignment is not constant. It is dynamic. It fluctuates with state, context, and phase of life. Expecting to remain perpetually aligned is like expecting to stay permanently inspired or permanently calm. It ignores the cyclical nature of systems. Periods of coherence are followed by periods of recalibration. Silence follows signal. Rest follows movement. Misinterpreting recalibration as failure is one of the most common mistakes people make. When alignment fades, they panic. They assume they did something wrong. They try to recreate past conditions. But alignment never repeats itself in the same form. Trying to recreate it is like trying to relive a season. The conditions have changed. You have changed. The task is not to go back. It is to listen again. Listening is different from watching. Watching is analytical. Listening is receptive. Watching asks, is this working? Listening asks, what is being asked of me now? One demands control. The other allows guidance, and guidance does not always feel good. Sometimes alignment asks you to slow down when you want to accelerate. Sometimes it asks you to stay when you want to escape. Sometimes it asks you to release something that still feels alive. These moments are the true tests, not because they are dramatic, but because they are quiet. There is no coincidence to justify the choice, no sign to point to, only an internal sense of fit or misfit. This is where many people betray alignment without realizing it. They wait for external confirmation to act instead of trusting internal coherence. They want the universe to move first. But alignment is not obedience, it is cooperation. Sometimes you move first. Sometimes the world does. The dance changes. Awareness complicates this dance, but it also deepens it. Once you accept that alignment cannot be monitored into existence, you relax back into participation. You stop asking whether you are in sync and start responding to what is in front of you. Timing recovers. Flow returns, not because you chased it, but because you stopped interrupting it. This is the quiet maturity of alignment. It no longer feels magical. It feels ordinary, natural. Like walking without thinking about walking, like breathing without counting breaths. The drama fades, the reliability increases, and something else happens. As you stop obsessing over your own alignment, you begin to notice how others affect it, how certain environments sharpen you and others dull you, how some conversations clarify and others drain, how some choices feel light even when difficult and others feel heavy even when rewarded. This awareness is not mystical, it is ecological. You begin to sense which systems you belong in and which you don't. You stop forcing compatibility. You stop negotiating misfit. And that leads to a deeper, more uncomfortable truth. Alignment is not about improving your life. It is about placing you where you belong in the larger system. Sometimes that improves comfort. Sometimes it increases responsibility. Sometimes it isolates you. Sometimes it exposes you, which means the question ahead is no longer about luck, timing, or coincidence. It is about cost. What does alignment demand in exchange for coherence? What does it take away as it gives? And why do some people, once aligned, look less happy but more certain? Because the final truth may be this: alignment does not promise ease. It promises direction. There comes a moment, often quietly, when you realize alignment is not optimizing your comfort. It is optimizing your direction. And those two goals are rarely the same. Comfort seeks stability. Direction seeks movement. Comfort wants reassurance. Direction wants honesty. And honesty has a way of dismantling the structures you built to feel safe. This is where many people stop. Not because they don't understand alignment, but because they understand it too well. When you begin moving in the right direction, life often becomes less negotiable. The gray areas shrink. The compromises you used to survive on stop working. Situations that once felt tolerable become unbearable. You can no longer pretend not to know what you know. And knowledge, once integrated, demands action. This is the hidden cost no one talks about. Alignment removes plausible deniability. Before, you could blame randomness, bad luck, other people, timing. Now, those explanations feel thin. You sense when something is off immediately. You feel the resistance in your body before the consequences appear. And when you ignore it, the feedback is faster, sharper, more personal, not cruel, precise. This precision is exhausting, because aligned living accelerates cause and effect. You no longer have the luxury of drifting for years before reality responds. The response comes quickly. A conversation goes wrong immediately. A misaligned choice produces instant friction. A truthful decision creates immediate movement. Life speeds up. People mistake this acceleration for chaos, but it's not chaos, it's compression. The distance between action and outcome collapses. And while that can feel destabilizing, it is also profoundly clarifying. You waste less time, you learn faster, you suffer more efficiently. This is why aligned people often look intense, even when they are calm. Their lives have fewer buffers, less padding, fewer illusions. They are closer to the edge of consequence, not because they are reckless, but because they are responsive. They don't defer feedback. They don't numb discomfort. They don't postpone truth. Alignment sharpens life, and sharp things cut both ways. One of the most painful realizations alignment brings is that many of your struggles were not imposed on you. They were maintained by you, not consciously, not maliciously, but through attachment, to identity, to familiarity, to stories about who you had to be loved, accepted, or safe. When alignment disrupts these attachments, it feels like betrayal. You did everything right and still things fell apart. But alignment does not reward obedience. It rewards coherence, and coherence sometimes requires dismantling structures that obedience built. This is why aligned phases often coincide with endings. Jobs end, relationships end, beliefs end. Entire versions of you become obsolete. And while the external losses are visible, the internal loss is more devastating. You lose certainty. You lose the narrative that explained your suffering. You lose the excuse that kept you stationary. What replaces it is not immediate joy. It is responsibility for direction. Once you sense alignment, you cannot unknow it. You cannot return to drifting without discomfort. You can still choose misalignment, but the cost is higher. The system has shown you another way, and it will not pretend you didn't see it. This is why some people unconsciously sabotage alignment. They provoke chaos. They create distractions. They reintroduce noise. Not because they want to fail, but because failure feels familiar. It has rules they understand. Alignment feels open-ended, demanding, exposed. In misalignment, you suffer, but you know why. In alignment, you are asked to move without guarantees. This brings us to a difficult truth. Alignment does not make life easier. It makes it truer. And truth requires courage, not optimism. Courage to leave when staying would be rewarded. Courage to stay when leaving would be praised. Courage to be misunderstood. Courage to disappoint. Courage to choose fit over approval. The world often celebrates the visible rewards of alignment, success, timing, ease. It rarely acknowledges the internal toll, the loneliness of coherence, the way it isolates you from people who are still negotiating misfit. There comes a moment, often quietly, when you realize alignment is not optimizing your comfort. It is optimizing your direction. And those two goals are rarely the same. Comfort seeks stability. Direction seeks movement. Comfort wants reassurance. Direction wants honesty. And honesty has a way of dismantling the structures you built to feel safe. This is where many people stop, not because they don't understand alignment, but because they understand it too well. When you begin moving in the right direction, life often becomes less negotiable. The gray areas shrink. The compromises you used to survive on stop working. Situations that once felt tolerable become unbearable. The way it forces you to outgrow communities that once defined you. Growth narratives skip this part. They jump from struggle to triumph. But alignment lives in the long middle, where nothing is resolved, but everything is clear. You are no longer confused, but you are not yet comfortable. You are moving, but you don't know where you will land. This is where trust replaces hope. Hope wants a specific outcome. Trust accepts direction without detail. Alignment does not tell you what you will get. It tells you which way is honest. And honesty is not always kind in the short term. There is also grief here. Grief for paths you could have taken. Grief for people you might have stayed with. Grief for versions of yourself that were never fully realized. Alignment does not erase these ghosts. It makes peace with them by refusing to chase them. And in that refusal, something subtle shifts. You stop bargaining with reality. You stop asking, what if I had done this differently? What if I had waited longer? What if I had tried harder? These questions belong to a world where outcomes are negotiable through effort alone. Alignment teaches you that some outcomes are simply incompatible with who you are becoming. This is not fatalism, it is discernment. Discernment is quieter than ambition. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't impress others. But it saves you from wasting your life pursuing victories that would hollow you out. Aligned people often measure success differently. Not by accumulation, but by fit. Not by applause, but by coherence. They ask fewer questions about whether something will work, and more about whether it belongs. And when something doesn't belong, they let it go faster, even when it looks valuable. From the outside, this can look like self-sabotage. From the inside, it feels like relief. This relief is not happiness, it is integrity. And integrity has a strange side effect. It simplifies decision-making. When your internal state is coherent, choices become obvious. Not easy, obvious. You still feel fear, you still feel doubt, but the direction is clear, the noise is reduced. This is when people start saying things like, "I don't know why, but this just feels right," or "I can't explain it, but I know I can't stay here." These are not mystical statements, they are reports of coherence. The system is aligned enough that misfit is immediately detectable. This clarity, however, creates another challenge. When life becomes clear, excuses disappear. You can no longer claim confusion as a shield. You can no longer hide behind complexity. You know what you are avoiding. You know what you are postponing. And every day you choose comfort over direction, the friction increases. This is the final test of alignment. Not whether you can recognize it, but whether you can live with its demands. Because alignment will not chase you. It will not beg. It will not negotiate. It will simply remain available, waiting for coherence. When you move toward it, it responds. When you move away, it goes quiet. And quiet does not mean gone, it means waiting. The question that remains, the one we can no longer avoid, is this. If alignment demands so much, why pursue it at all? Why not accept randomness, negotiate misfit, and live a quieter life? The answer lies in what happens when you don't. Because misalignment has a cost too, a slower, deeper cost. One that doesn't announce itself with crises, but with numbness, with repetition, with the haunting sense that your life is happening next to you instead of through you. And that brings us to the final, unsettling territory. What happens when a life stays misaligned for too long? What patterns emerge? What does reality do when feedback is ignored repeatedly? That is what we need to face next. When a life remains misaligned for too long, the consequences are rarely dramatic at first. They are quiet, repetitive. Days blur together. Conversations recycle themselves. The same problems return wearing different faces. Nothing is catastrophically wrong, yet nothing truly moves. You function, you perform, you survive, but something essential feels stalled, like an engine idling in neutral while fuel burns away. This is the hidden danger of misalignment. It doesn't destroy you outright. It erodes you slowly. In systems theory, feedback that is consistently ignored doesn't stop. It escalates. Signals increase in intensity when response is absent. In biology, pain sharpens when damage continues. In psychology, suppressed emotions resurface as anxiety, depression, or numbness. In narratives, unresolved arcs repeat until they are addressed. Reality is persistent. It doesn't give up on coherence easily. So, when misalignment becomes chronic, life begins to loop. You meet the same people in different bodies. You face the same choices under new circumstances. You feel the same dissatisfaction no matter how much you change the surface details. New job, same frustration. New relationship, same conflict. New environment, same emptiness. It feels like being haunted by your own patterns. People often call this bad luck. But bad luck implies novelty. This is not novel. It is familiar to the point of exhaustion. These loops are not punishment. They are invitations that have gone unanswered. The system keeps presenting the same lesson in different packaging, hoping eventually you will recognize the shape instead of the wrapper. When recognition doesn't happen, repetition becomes the only language left. This is where many people begin to feel trapped, not by circumstance, but by themselves. They sense that something must change, but they don't know what. Or worse, they know exactly what, but feel unable to act. Fear of loss outweighs the discomfort of stagnation. So they stay. And staying has a cost. Misalignment drains vitality. Not in bursts, but in leaks. Motivation fades. Curiosity dulls. The future feels abstract instead of magnetic. People describe this as burnout, midlife crisis, or existential fatigue, but at its core, it is desynchronization. You are living in a rhythm that no longer matches who you are becoming. This is why misaligned lives often feel heavy. Everything requires effort. Simple tasks feel burdensome. Decisions feel overwhelming. There is constant resistance, not because the world is hostile, but because every action requires compensating for internal contradiction. You are pushing in one direction, while something deeper pulls another way. Over time, this internal tug-of-war creates numbness. Numbness is not peace, it is a protective shutdown. When feedback becomes too painful or too confusing, the system dampens sensitivity. You feel less, want less, risk less. Life becomes manageable, but muted. This is perhaps the greatest tragedy of misalignment. Not failure, not suffering, but the quiet shrinking of possibility. And yet, even here, alignment does not abandon you. It waits. It waits in small irritations you can't explain, in sudden envy when you see someone living more honestly, in moments of grief that don't belong to the present, in the strange relief you feel when imagining a different life, even if that life scares you. These are not distractions. They are signals leaking through the numbness. Sometimes the system escalates further. When subtle feedback fails, stronger disruptions appear. Crises, losses, breakdowns, illness, forced endings. From the outside, these look cruel. From the inside, they feel shattering. But often, they are the first moments of honesty in years. The structure you were clinging to collapses, and for the first time, you are not maintaining misfit. You are simply standing in the rubble, exposed but real. This is why people sometimes say tragedy changed their life for the better, even while acknowledging the pain. The tragedy did not improve them. It removed resistance. It broke the loop. It forced realignment by making misalignment impossible to sustain. This is not an argument for suffering. It is an observation about response. When alignment is ignored voluntarily, it arrives involuntarily. The system will not allow indefinite drift without consequence. Not out of malice, but because coherence is more stable than incoherence, and systems move towards stability over time. This realization reframes many life events we label as unfortunate. The job you lost that you never would have left. The relationship that ended despite your effort. The failure that stripped you of an identity that no longer fit. These moments feel like rejection until you see what they made possible. Until you notice that life began moving again. Not necessarily in the direction you wanted, but in a direction that felt alive. Misalignment stagnates. Alignment moves. Movement is not always upward. Sometimes it is sideways. Sometimes it is downward before it ascends. But it is movement, and movement restores feedback, sensation, engagement. Even pain feels preferable to numbness because pain confirms participation. This is why people who realign after long stagnation often describe feeling more alive even in hardship. Their problems feel meaningful. Their struggles feel purposeful. They are no longer fighting themselves. They are responding to what is actually happening. And this is the paradox. Alignment does not guarantee happiness, but misalignment guarantees dissatisfaction. One may hurt, but it hurts honestly. The other numbs, and numbness rots quietly. So the real choice is not between ease and difficulty. It is between coherence and compromise. Compromise can work for a while. It can build stability, security, predictability. But if it contradicts your deeper direction, it will eventually demand payment. Alignment, on the other hand, asks for payment up front. Loss, uncertainty, courage. But it compounds. This brings us to a critical question. If misalignment creates loops and alignment creates movement, how do you tell which one you're in while you're living it? How do you distinguish between patience and avoidance, between surrender and stagnation, between a necessary pause and a slow decay? Because from inside a life, these states can feel identical. Answering that question requires a different lens, one that doesn't rely on outcomes or comfort or external validation. One that reads signals not in events, but in experience. That lens is what we need next. The hardest part about alignment is that from the inside, it often feels exactly like uncertainty. Waiting can look like wisdom, or it can look like fear wearing patience as a mask. Surrender can feel like trust, or like avoidance dressed up as spirituality. And decay can feel calm, because numbness is quiet. This is why so many lives drift for years without collapse. Nothing screams. Nothing breaks. Nothing clearly demands change. And yet, something essential is quietly eroding. So, how do you tell the difference while you are still inside it? The answer is not found in outcomes. Outcomes lag behind alignment. They arrive late, sometimes years late. By the time success or failure shows up, the internal decision has already been made. If you wait for results to tell you whether you are aligned, you are always reading yesterday's signal. The difference is felt earlier, closer, more intimately. Alignment has a texture. Even when it is difficult, it feels clean. There is friction, but not confusion. There is fear, but not fragmentation. You may not know where you are going, but you know why you are moving. Your energy is spent forward, not sideways. At the end of the day, you are tired, but you are not empty. Misalignment feels different. it feels heavy without weight, busy without progress. You expend enormous energy managing discomfort rather than engaging with reality. Your thoughts circle instead of deepen. Decisions feel postponed indefinitely, even when the cost of waiting is obvious. There is a dull ache of dissatisfaction that doesn't sharpen into pain, because pain would require honesty. This distinction is subtle but reliable. When you are aligned, difficulty has direction. When you are misaligned, comfort has decay. Another signal lies in how time feels. In alignment, time feels dense. Even slow periods feel meaningful. Days contain texture. Memory forms easily. You can recall what mattered. In misalignment, time feels thin. Weeks vanish without landmarks. You struggle to remember what you did because nothing asked for your presence. Life is happening, but you are not required to show up fully. This is not laziness, it is disconnection. Alignment demands presence. Even rest is active because it restores you towards something. Misalignment turns rest into avoidance. You rest not to move again, but to delay movement altogether. And delay, repeated long enough, becomes stagnation. There is also a bodily signal that people often ignore because it feels irrational. Alignment feels expansive in the chest, even when the choice is scary. Misalignment feels constrictive, even when the choice is praised. You accept a role that looks impressive and feel inexplicably tight. You consider a path that looks risky and feel strangely calm. These sensations are not mystical, they are neurological. The body registers coherence faster than the mind can rationalize it. This is why people often say, "I knew it was wrong from the start," long after consequences arrive. The signal was always there, it just didn't have language yet. Fear complicates this, because fear exists in both states. Alignment does not remove fear, it reframes it. In alignment, fear accompanies growth. It points outward toward the unknown. In misalignment, fear accompanies stasis. It points inward toward imagined loss. One invites courage, the other invites avoidance. You can tell which one you're facing by asking a simple question. Is this fear asking me to grow or asking me to hide? Another indicator is how you relate to uncertainty. Alignment makes uncertainty feel alive. You don't know what will happen, but you are curious. Misalignment makes uncertainty feel oppressive. You don't know what will happen, and you dread it. Curiosity is a signal of coherence. Dread is often a signal of resistance. There is also the matter of repetition. Alignment brings novelty, even in routine. You notice new details, you learn, you adapt. Misalignment brings repetition without learning. The same argument, the same frustration, the same disappointment, replayed with minor variations. When patterns repeat without insight, it is not patience, it is avoidance. This is where many people confuse endurance with wisdom. Endurance is valuable when it serves direction. It is destructive when it serves stagnation. Staying is not inherently virtuous. Leaving is not inherently brave. The virtue lies in coherence. Does the choice align with who you are becoming, or does it preserve who you no longer are? Alignment also changes how you experience feedback. In coherence, feedback feels informative, even when it hurts. You adjust, you learn, you move. In misalignment, feedback feels personal, overwhelming, or unfair. You defend, you rationalize, you numb. The difference is not in the feedback itself, but in your capacity to respond to it. Responsiveness is the quiet signature of alignment. When you are aligned, you respond rather than react. There is a pause between stimulus and action. That pause is not hesitation, it is clarity. Misalignment collapses that pause. You react impulsively or not at all. Both are forms of avoidance. Another sign appears in how you talk about your life. In alignment, your language becomes simpler. You explain less, you justify less. You don't need elaborate narratives to defend your choices. In misalignment, stories multiply. You need reasons, explanations, excuses. Complexity increases to protect a fragile coherence. Truth simplifies. Misfit complicates. Perhaps the most telling signal is how you feel about the future when no one is watching. Not the future you describe to others, but the one you sense privately, late at night. Does it feel open, even if uncertain? Or does it feel closed, even if secure? Openness indicates alignment. Closure indicates decay. This is why external success can coexist with deep misalignment. Applause can seal a life shut. And external struggle can coexist with alignment because struggle can still move. The The difference is not visible on the surface, it is experiential. Alignment is not about choosing the right option, it is about choosing the honest one. Honesty with yourself about what fits, what drains, what expands, what contracts. This honesty is often inconvenient. It asks you to disappoint others, to release narratives, to tolerate ambiguity. But it also restores agency, because when you stop lying to yourself about fit, you stop negotiating with misalignment. You no longer need the universe to intervene dramatically. You respond to subtle signals early. You adjust course before collapse. Life becomes less dramatic, but more precise. This is where alignment stops feeling mystical and starts feeling practical. You don't need signs. You need sensitivity. You don't need certainty. You need responsiveness. You don't need guarantees. You need coherence. And when coherence is present, probability stops feeling hostile or indulgent. It feels neutral, even cooperative. Things don't always work out, but they make sense. Losses feel painful but purposeful. Gains feel fitting rather than addictive. This brings us to the final realization. If alignment is not about luck, not about control, not about prediction, then what is it ultimately about? It is about participation, not dominating reality, not surrendering to it blindly, but participating honestly in the timing of your own life. And that leaves us with one final question to face. If alignment is real, if it shapes probability, timing, relationships, and direction, then what happens when you stop fighting it completely? What does a life look like when it no longer argues with the current, but moves with it consciously? That is where this journey must end. When you finally stop fighting alignment, something unexpected happens. Life does not become easier in the way you imagined. It becomes quieter, not empty, precise. The constant internal argument softens. The background noise of second-guessing fades. You are no longer negotiating with every moment, trying to bend it toward an outcome you rehearsed in your head. You begin to meet moments as they are, and in doing so, you discover that reality has been meeting you the whole time. This is the quiet end of randomness, not the dramatic revelation that everything was scripted, not the comforting lie that everything happens for a reason, but the unsettling recognition that meaning emerges when resistance dissolves. When you move with the current instead of against it, events stop feeling arbitrary. They still surprise you, they still hurt you, they still delight you, but they stop feeling hostile. They stop feeling like attacks or rewards. They feel like responses. Alignment at this stage no longer feels like something you are trying to achieve. It feels like something you are maintaining through honesty. Honesty about your limits. Honesty about your desires. Honesty about what you can no longer pretend not to know. You stop forcing yourself into roles that require constant self-betrayal. You stop chasing futures that look impressive but feel wrong. You stop asking the world to validate choices that contradict your inner state. And in that stopping, momentum returns. Not explosive momentum, subtle momentum, the kind that shows up as fewer wrong turns, shorter recoveries, cleaner endings. You still fail, but you don't spiral as long. You still lose, but the losses don't hollow you out. You still fear, but fear no longer paralyzes you. It informs you. This is what it means to be in sync. Not that everything works, but that nothing is wasted. When aligned, even mistakes participate. Even detours teach efficiently. Even suffering has a shape. You are no longer accumulating random scars. You are accumulating signal. And signal over time creates clarity. People often ask what alignment gives you in the end. Success? Peace? Fulfillment? These questions misunderstand the nature of the shift. Alignment does not give you outcomes. It gives you orientation. It places you correctly within your own life. And orientation changes everything. When you are oriented, choices simplify. Not because options disappear, but because misfit becomes obvious. You no longer need elaborate pro and con lists. You feel when something belongs. You feel when it doesn't. This feeling is not infallible, but it is fast. And speed matters when life is moving. You also stop comparing your timing to others. This is one of the most liberating consequences. You realize that being early or late is meaningless without context. Some lives ripen quickly and burn out. Others unfold slowly and deepen. Alignment has no universal schedule. It has only coherence with your internal rhythm. This dissolves envy. You stop resenting other people's luck because you see that their alignment is not transferable. Their timing would not fit you. Their wins would cost you something different. And you stop clinging to your own past misfortunes because you see that they shaped the sensitivity you now rely on. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was random. It was responsive. This does not mean you romanticize suffering. Alignment is not a justification for pain. It is an integration of it. You acknowledge what hurt without building your identity around it. You carry the lesson without carrying the wound. At this point, something subtle but profound shifts in how you relate to uncertainty. You stop demanding answers in advance. You stop asking life to explain itself before you participate. You act without guarantees, not recklessly, but honestly. You trust that feedback will arrive, because it always has. This trust is not faith in a benevolent universe. It is trust in responsiveness. You know that when you are coherent, reality responds clearly. When you are incoherent, it resists. This feedback loop becomes your compass, and the world begins to feel strangely intimate. Not personal in the sense that it revolves around you, but intimate in the sense that your participation matters. You are no longer a passive object being thrown around by chance. You are an active element in a dynamic system. Your attention shapes what you notice. Your choices shape what becomes possible. Your honesty shapes the quality of timing you experience. Luck, in this light, is no longer mysterious. It is relational. You were never lucky because something favored you. You were lucky when you were available to what was already unfolding, and unlucky when you were unavailable, distracted, misaligned, or resisting. This reframes the entire story of a life. Your past stops looking like a series of wins and losses. It looks like calibration. Missed opportunities that saved you, delays that matured you, failures that redirected you. Even the periods of stagnation had a function. They showed you the cost of ignoring feedback. And the moments of flow were not rewards, they were confirmations. Confirmation that when you listen, when you respond, when you move honestly, the system cooperates, not because it cares about your happiness, but because coherence is efficient. Reality prefers efficiency. This is why alignment often feels calm rather than ecstatic. It is not adrenaline, it is friction reduction. You are no longer wasting energy fighting what is, and the energy you save becomes presence. Presence is the final gift. When you are present, life stops happening next to you and starts happening through you. You feel the weight of moments. You remember days. You notice subtlety. Even ordinary experiences feel textured. You are no longer waiting for your real life to begin. This is the quiet miracle no one advertises. Not success, not enlightenment, not constant joy, but participation. The sense that you are here, fully inside your own timing. And with that comes a strange peace with uncertainty. You know things will change. You know alignment will drift and return. You know loss will come. You know fear will resurface. But you also know how to listen again, how to recalibrate, how to move back into coherence when you slip. You are no longer afraid of randomness because you no longer see your life as random. You see it as responsive. And that is the final truth. Luck was never something you had or didn't have. It was never a blessing reserved for others. It was the byproduct of alignment, of attention meeting timing, of honesty meeting opportunity, of movement meeting readiness. Some people were never lucky. They were synced. And the moment you understand that, you stop chasing luck altogether. You start listening. You start aligning. And life, quietly, unmistakably, begins to answer back.